Australians must be so lucky. Either that or we actually have a dangerously arrogant and ignorant Prime Minister leading us to terrible danger. You see, apparently it's just Anthony Albanese alone who reckons there's no real danger of war and there's no need to give our Australian Defence Force $1 more than is already promised. Albanese today made clear he knows better than all the experts, better than our former head of the Defence, the ADF, better than our former head of Army, our former head of the Air Force, our former head of the Defence Department, all telling him that the ADF is short of weapons and soldiers and desperately needs a lot more money.
We need to get away from this idea that someone somewhere else says something, so we just go, oh, okay.
Even more significant is that Albanese today also made clear that he knew better than the United States as well, the country that we actually rely on almost entirely for our defence. And that is setting him up for a dangerous confrontation with President Donald Trump, who's probably sick of how we're not getting the message. You see, US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth last week told Defence Minister Richard Marles privately in Singapore that Australia must urgently increase spending on defence from 2% of GDP now to 3.5% very soon. But then Marles refused to tell journalists what Hegseth had just demanded, trying to hide the message.
He did specifically raise that 3% of GDP target?
Oh, I wouldn't put a number on.
Well, Hegseth wasn't putting up with that. He then published a readout on his website of his meeting with Marles that did put a number on it. The exact number, saying he conveyed to Marles that Australia should increase its defence spending to 3.5% of our GDP, and as soon as possible. It's most unusual to publicly reveal private advice so bluntly. But America under Donald Trump does mean what it says. It is sick of paying for the West's defence when China is now such a huge threat. Trump wants America's allies to step up and spend at least 3.5% on their own defence as well, if they still want the US to be there when it all hits the fan, or else.
If you're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to defend you.
But Albanese today played the patriotism card. Oh, he wasn't going to be bullied by foreigners into spending more on defence. Never mind what Trump says. Never mind if NATO nations this month will discuss raising their military spending to 3.5% to meet the danger from the Russian-Chinese alliance. Never mind that Britain is talking about lifting its defence spending as well.
We're a sovereign nation that need to have pride in our sovereignty and in our capacity to make decisions in our national interest.
Honestly, but the problem for Albanese is that it isn't just foreigners, including our main defender, by the way, saying our spending must rise. As I said, our own top defence experts are screaming at him to do it as well. Former head of Army, Peter Lay, in the Australian Today, again warned that without the United States, we would be almost defenceless. He said, those who wear Australia's uniform place great trust in those who task and equip them. And this trust is not being honoured. Our former Chief of the Air Force has said we need to have more independent, more robust capability than we've got. And we need to do it pretty quickly. And he said, I don't think that's going to happen under the current funding line. How many more warnings does Albanese intend to ignore? That our military is being stripped of weapon systems. We've got aircraft orders cancelled, ships missing, munitions not enough, supply ships. We couldn't even follow the Chinese ships that were circumnavigating our coast firing guns. Mine clearers, we lack them. All to pay for nuclear submarines that we will not get for at least another decade. Albanese's own strategic policy review said our defence force is not fully fit for purpose. More funding will be required. And when our top strategy think tank, the government-funded Australian Strategic Policy Institute, last week said the same, that our defence force was a paper force that couldn't meet near-term threats, Albanese just threatened it.
Seriously, they need to I think, have a look at themselves as well and the way that they conduct themselves in debates.
Albanese doesn't seem to get there really is a problem. And if, God forbid, there is a war, history will never forgive him for leaving our military without the weapons we need to defend ourselves. Let me just show you something, a small glimpse of the problem. Now, drones, this is the new warfare. And this is not even the worst example I could give. I showed you last night Ukraine's amazing drone attack on Russia on Sunday, wiping out a third of Russia's long-range bombers, more than 40 it claimed, using cheap drones made in Ukraine, including, by the way, by volunteers like this British guy.
They look like this. Big boy drones, 13 or 15-inch kamikaze drones ploughing into every single one of these Russian strategic bombers.
Now, Ukraine now makes more than 2 million drones a year. It even has a navy that's only drone vessels. Yet even that navy forced Russia's real, ship navy out of the Black Sea. And now look at this. This is a map of the latest Ukrainian drone attacks just yesterday on Russian-occupied Crimea and Zaporizhzhia, causing massive blackouts. See all those lines? That's individual drone attacks. Now, if China launched that kind of mass attack, can you imagine, from a few ships out at sea, just off our coast, do you think we could defend ourselves? Now, it is true that we're not doing nothing. I mean, there are some good signs. For instance, the Australian Defence Force, the ADF, is working with Australian Defence Industries to create an underwater drone, the Ghost Shark, unmanned, for surveillance and for attack. It's also working with Australia's Drone Shield company on this anti-drone gun, disrupting radio signals to drones. Drone Shield's already supplied these guns to Ukraine. But here's the thing, it's developing so fast. Already Russia has been switching instead to drones using fibre optic cables. That's up to 20 kilometres of line running all the way back to the operator, meaning it can't be knocked out by blocking radio signals, and delivers even better pictures of the battlefield. And so many of these ones are now used by both sides in Ukraine that the battlefields are covered with drone fibres. Now, our Defence Force isn't stupid. It last year signed contracts to examine the full range of defences against small drones, but said they had to be delivered by 2030, 5 years from now. Seriously? Another Australian defence company is working on a laser to knock drones out of the skies, but it's the British Navy that plans to deploy them on its ships, not by 2030, but just 2 years from now. Now, Australia's slowness is exactly the problem, as well as a lack of budget, as retired Major General Gus McLachlan, now a consultant to a couple of drone companies, said today.
What's incredibly important coming out of Ukraine is the speed of their adaptation cycle. From innovation to adoption, we think is as quick as 100 days. And the problem we have in Australia is our processes are geared towards huge exotic projects like submarines, frigates, ships, tanks, etc., which are very slow and deliberate, probably for good reason. We don't want to waste taxpayers' money. But the speed that the Ukrainians are demonstrating technology is changing is effectively catching us out. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to do in Australia is adjust the way we acquire technology.
We're slow because we're complacent. We're slow because we're bureaucratic. And we're slow because our Prime Minister shows no sign of urgency, no deep concern about the China threat, for instance. And of course, we're slow because there's just no money. And if Trump hears that, well, Prime Minister, a little advice, I'd stay away from the White House.